Metroid Prime, a game I've been playing for the better part of the last decade. I've replayed this game an almost unhealthy amount of times. Yet it never lost its appeal no matter how many times I ran through it. Next to Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, I'd have to say that this is one of my favorite games ever made. So what does this game mean to me? Well, let's get into it. I first played this game back in 2009 when I was over at my old friend's house one day. He had told me about the Metroid series and showed me a bit of Metroid Prime. When he let me try it for myself, I was absolutely horrible at it. The controls felt clunky and unorthodox. I'd never played a first-person shooter by that point, and the tank controls felt very foreign to my hands. I couldn't even get past the first boss due to this, and the fact that it scared my young 14-year-old self. It seems odd that this game scared me looking back, but I'd never seen anything like it before. I was never very good with dealing with giant monsters as a kid and young teen, and couldn't even say that the Godzilla movie it was so bad. But despite that, I pressed onward. After a few times coming over and playing more and more of the game, my friend was so gracious as to give me the game, along with his GameCube, Metroid Prime 2, and his Game Boy player, all of which I still own. When I got it home that afternoon, I made it my mission to beat the game. Coming off of the heels of the collectathon platformers of the late 90s and early 2000s, I was slowly beginning to feel right at home. Metroid Prime may not have been a collectathon per se, but it certainly had similar aspects to it, with a large focus on exploration for new upgrades and power-ups. These abilities would continue to aid you throughout the adventure and lead to new areas you couldn't access before. Just like whenever you would get a new move in Banjo-Kazooie or Tooie, two of my favorite games of all time. You see, one thing I want to see from all games is the progression of power. The ability to gain new techniques and powers by exploring the world and defeating bosses. I love this aspect in gaming greater than any other. It really gives the player a sense of progression and power that no other medium can create. When you're reading a book or watching a movie, you're not getting stronger as a viewer of those mediums. You're viewing the world through the lens or lenses of the main character or characters. And thus for me, there is a big disconnect between me and those forms of media. Hence why I often come back to video games to gauge myself a sense of power. Metroid Prime exemplifies this in every regard. It gives the player very obvious blockades to their progress, like a ramp you can't get up without the boost ball, or a colored door you need a specific beam type to open. These minor divergences and obstacles give the player a sense of direction, an incentive to become more powerful and obtain the abilities needed to access the other areas. Also, many of the game's bosses have a weakness to a particular ability, which also incentivizes the player to go out of their way to try out new techniques to defeat these creatures. This is a facet of gaming that's often overlooked. Power progression is a necessary component to video games, especially in the Metroid series, where your ability to even make it through the game is determined by the power-ups you've obtained. However, thankfully, only most of the power-ups are required. The missile upgrades for your elemental beams, and the extra expansions for your missiles, energy, and power bombs are all optional, meaning that those that don't care to explore all that much don't have to because they're not locking themselves out of certain areas if they decide not to go after these items. It certainly makes the game progression easier, but the fact that it's not required is the part that I like so much. All essential progression items are on the normal pathway you need to go through the game to progress. There may be a handful of occasions of backtracking, and I won't lie, without sequence breaking they can become rather frustrating, especially when searching for the Chozo artifacts. But even with that, they can never get old to me. These backtracking missions always allow me to explore new areas with my new abilities I didn't have when I came through the area the first time. And nothing about the repetitiveness of this game mechanic can ruin the overall experience for me. There's so much about this game that still impresses me. The graphics are some of the best the GameCube can possibly offer, and even make some Wii and even a few Wii U titles look dated by comparison. And do I even need to mention the soundtrack? I mean, a lot of the soundtrack is just remixes of Super Metroid and the other Metroid games' themes, but some of the original ones, such as Phendrana's Edge's theme, are just magic to my ears. The environments, despite being similar in many ways to Super Metroid, are nicely varied. I find it interesting how the game can go from a rainy field, to a deserty abandoned city, to the magma-filled depths, to a frozen tundra, and yet have it all feel like one cohesive world. The way some of the enemies in this game change their bodies to fit their environments is also interesting. It's almost like a lowland Pokemon in a sense. Like the Shriek Bats, for example. They have an ice variant in Phendrana Drifts that, while they do the same thing as all the other Shriek Bats, they have a different feel to them via their design and the location that they're in. Each of the different variations and creatures spice up the combat just enough to be more fun than just changing their color. The designs of the enemies are also incredibly creative, especially the variations of the space pirates. For example, the Elemental Troopers. These multicolored space pirates are a result of an attempt to reverse engineer Samus's various beam weapons, and they're colored to match the respective beam weapon they reverse engineered. Pink for Wave, white for Ice, red for Plasma, and yellow for Power Beam. while this does make it blatantly obvious which weapon they're weak to, I still love the designs. It's better than just the more simplistic reptilian design of the regular troopers. And the more advanced Phazon Field Troopers designs are even more impressive. They're very creative in my opinion, having large bubbles of pulsating Phazon all over their bodies. They also make for some fun mini-bosses, as well as one of the hardest bosses in the game, the Omega Pirate. And speaking of bosses, Metroid Prime may not have very many, but in my opinion at least, it has some of the best in the entire series. If you guys watched my top 5 favorite Metroid bosses I did a couple years ago, which if you didn't I'll leave a card in the corner so you can go check it out, I said that Thardus was one of my favorite bosses. But while I do still love the fight, I'm going to have to give the spot I gave to it to Meta Ridley instead. Not because Ridley is so iconic, or just because his theme is so good, but because he can be one of the easiest bosses in the game, and the most fun one to kill. My preferred method is to strike his chest with plasma beam shots or super missiles, then have him fall to the ground and hit him with the boost ball, which for some reason destroys his wings, and therefore cuts his health by a whopping 70%. Then I just proceed to unload on him with the Wave Buster. I have been able to defeat what's supposed to be a 20-minute boss battle in only 3 minutes using this method. And this method alone is what makes him my favorite boss in Metroid Prime. But aside from graphics, bosses, sound, and enemy design, the second to last thing I want to touch upon why I love this game are the power-ups. While many of them are just copy-paste from Super, such as the beams, the suits, the missiles, and both types of bombs, others like the Spider Ball come from other games like Metroid 2, and the visors which add a unique way of looking at the world. And if you guys have seen my top 5 favorite Metroid weapons, you'll know I put the boost ball as one of them. Zipping and zooming all across the ground like a giant bowling ball is so much fun for me, and makes for some very quick getaways from enemies you don't want to fight. Plus it even deals minor damage, and as I said earlier, it's the fastest way to take out Meta Ridley, which is the main reason why I love it so much. There's just a lot of variety in this game, and I can't conscribe my love for this game to one simple thing. Well, except maybe one. You see, there is one huge reason why I come back to this game, and if the footage and my Let's Play of the game didn't make it clear enough, it's because of the sequence breaks. Super Metroid is famous for all of the advanced techniques and sequence breaks you can do in the game. So much so that it's one of the most popular games to speedrun. But many of the techniques I could never quite master. However, in Metroid Prime, these tricks have a much lower threshold of skill to execute. Take the early space jump moves. All it requires is a special way to jump dash towards the side of the cliff to get to the ledge easier. Once you've done that, just walk over to the door and there you go. This trick admittedly took me a few months to get really good at, but I'm now so good at it that most of the time I can do it on my first try. Or take getting the plasma beam early. There's actually more than one way to do it. The first way, which is the more advanced technique and one I can't pull off, is to go through the lava and magmor caverns on the other side of the elevator of the Talon overworld. This trick can be done in conjunction with another trick that lets you get the ice beam early by walking out of bounds, something I also can't get right. But unlike with getting, say, the power bombs early in Metroid Prime 2, there are other methods to get the items early. I always get the ice beam after getting the boost ball, go back to Phendrana, head through the Space Pirate base to get to the thermal visor room, then head through the ice door to head through the gravity suit. And then I head back through the opposite series of rooms to then get the plasma beam. It may take longer, but for me, it's easier, and since it's easier, it makes it less frustrating for me. And for me, while I do sometimes like a challenge, making something easier for me just makes me want more and more to master it. Because once I've mastered it, I can do it on the fly and get even that much more enjoyment from it. If my reasons why I love this game weren't good enough for you, that's fine, that's totally okay for you to disagree with my opinion. But to me, this game is the game that single-handedly made me a Metroid fan, and I wouldn't have played any of the games in the franchise if it weren't for this one. I have been a fan of this series for going on 9 years now, and I will continue to be one even after the series goes away. Metroid Prime may have flaws in a lot of areas, as any game does, but that doesn't keep me from loving every minute of my experience with this title. It's the second best-selling game on the GameCube, and that alone should be a testament to how popular this game is. It brought a long-thought-dead franchise back to life in much the same way Samus Returns did earlier last year. And my experience with this game makes it one of my favorite of all time, and a classic in my eyes, and I will always thank this game for that. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, leave a like and comment on what game you'd like me to do in this series next. I plan on making more of these and making this a consistent series on my channel, so I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the matter. Anyway, that's all for me. This has been ZDS, making YouTuber fun one video at a time, and I will see you guys in the next video.